I'll start once again. So thank you everyone once again for joining this Wednesday evening. Today we're going to talk about how we can use new developments to make bike-friendly communities or help bring in new infrastructure which helps make friendly bike walk neighborhoods. And we're going to have that discussed in using an example of a North 40 project from Los Gatos and how a 40-acre project helped bring in bicycle-friendly amenities in the area and just helped enhance the entire community to be more walkable and bikeable. We're going to have two speakers tonight. One of them is Wendy Baker, who is the developer for the development. And then we're going to have Maria Risto, who's currently a council member from the town of Los Gatos, but at that time was a community member and a very strong advocate whose sole purpose when she started was to make sure that the development goes down. But we'll hear from her about how her experience and perspective changed through the process and how she finally got through supporting it and making sure that it is better than what it was proposed. So I'm going to hand it over to Wendy, and we'll have Maria trickle in a few minutes, and then she can talk about her part.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here today. I actually recognize a lot of the names on here through other projects that we work on throughout Silicon Valley. Maybe I will first let you know a little bit about Harmony Park and myself, and just how I got involved in this project. Harmony Park, we started Harmony Park about, unbelievably, like about almost 7 years ago. And my business partner and I both came actually from Grosvenor and Summerhill Homes, which were partners on the North 40 project. But we had also known each other for, at that point, over a decade, and had talked about creating a development company for almost as long. So now we've known each other about 20 years, and creating walkable, bikeable communities is a high priority for both my business partner, Don Cobras, and myself. So Harmony Park is a real estate development firm. We do infill development and focusing on Silicon Valley, but we also do client services. So we're a smaller, more boutique development company, but we also do, our sort of specialty has always been larger master planned communities. And by that, I mean something like my business partner worked on Hunters Point Shipyard, and I worked on, for example, the North 40, but some of you recognize me maybe from the work that we've done on Sequoia Station in Redwood City. So we work with sometimes other developers on these larger master plans. In this instance, on the North 40, this project started in 2007. So this is, a multi-decade project. And when I was introduced to the property as a partner with Grosvenor, that was 2011. So at that time, the hat I wore was as vice president of Summerhill Homes. And so I've kind of seen this project as the vice president of Summerhill Homes through when I started with Don Harmony Park. But Harmony Park also has a project, a commercial project within the North 40. So we are still attached to the North 40, and we're also working with Grosvenor on the second phase of the North 40. So we will have worked on this project by the time probably this is completed for 25 years, I would imagine, unbelievably. So a better part of my career will have been spent on this particular property. So so then you get very invested. They could become like your children, all these projects, and they become very important to you. So we really put a lot of value in what it is that we're doing in creating places and not just developments. So that's a little bit of background about Harmony Park, and a little just a touch on the North 40. So do you want me to kind of get going as far as just a little bit about the location? Okay, I'll just keep rolling until Maria comes on in.
Sure, just one more thing to add. We
Yeah.
also have Ed Morimoto with us. Would you like to introduce him and his connection with this project?
Yeah, I wasn't sure if Ed wanted to stay in the shadows. This is one of those small world encounters, but Ed Morimoto is actually, his family were property owners of the North 40 property, continue to be property owners for the phase 2. And we're working directly with Ed as our equity for the commercial portion of the North 40. So Ed is very engaged, has been very engaged in this. Obviously, Ed is also a bike activist, so this is very meaningful to him. But anything you want to add there, Ed? I don't want to overstate or understate your value.
I was trying to fly under the radar on this. No, maybe actually what I should explain is why I'm not a panelist in this discussion, because, sorry. So as Wendy mentioned, our family has owned a large chunk of the property that is now known as the North 40. Kind of entrusted it to Grosvenor for its ultimate development. My personal role in this, however, kind of actually starts even after Wendy got involved. I had a life on the East Coast before coming back to California and taking a role with the family. By the time that I got involved in the project, most of what we're going to talk about here has already been put in place. Now, as Wendy mentioned, and some of you know about my involvement with the Bike Coalition, I'm very happy with the way that North 40 Phase 1 played out as far as creating a very bike and ped friendly neighborhood, which wasn't necessarily going to happen without the efforts of both developers and activists like Maria, who hopefully will be joining shortly. But unfortunately, I wasn't actually a part of any of those discussions and those negotiations. Was happy to have kind of the project that we, were involved with, continue to be involved with, as kind of an example of what can be done when folks come together and put a priority on things other than just car traffic.
Thanks, Ed. And sorry, didn't mean to put you on the spot.
So why don't I share my screen and just orient everybody? Probably not everyone is familiar with the North 40 if you aren't down in the South Bay. But the North 40, everyone can see this. The North 40 is probably not the ideal location that you start thinking about bike improvements just when you look at it from a map like this. It is about 40 acres that's nestled on the sort of the corner of 17 and 85 and the ramps that serve it. Another major street on the west side is, or excuse me, on the east side is Los Gatos Boulevard, and on the south side is Lark Avenue. And if you know Los Gatos, these are all very, very busy streets for the town. This is about 2 miles, I would say, outside of downtown. So it's sort of the first exit that you would take to get to Los Gatos. And a lot of people just go right down Los Gatos Boulevard to get to downtown. There's also, however, when you start kind of peeling apart the layers, there is down the street is the Netflix campus, and adjacent to that, and as well as adjacent to many properties, is the Los Gatos Creek Trail, which provides, that's how I would bike to work from my home in Saratoga. So that provides an opportunity for people to get all the way to downtown, right? If you're in Los Gatos, or all the way from downtown San Jose to downtown Los Gatos. So it's actually it's a very, very busy trail. And so there was sort of this existing infrastructure that existed, but we were sort of nestled here in an island, I'll say. So I want everybody to think about what you were doing in 2007 when we first started this project, and probably things that exist today were never contemplated, right, back then. And so because this was sort of a long process, for better or for worse, some of the tools have changed. So as a part of, as a part of this, just of note, the North 40 was actually part of a specific plan process that the town embarked upon. When or if Maria joins, I will say that Maria Risto, Mayor Risto, was not a mayor at the time. She was not a planning commissioner at the time. She was actually an activist within the town and had been involved in, I would put the hat on Maria as being sort of anti-development at that time and possibly today, but anti-development, anti-traditional development maybe is a better way of saying it. And she and a group that she was engaged in actually had fought pretty hard about some of the challenges that they were encountering with the adjacent Netflix project. And so when I first met Maria Risto, it was not under the guise of her being a council member or even her being a bike activist. It was her being a concerned resident. But she was involved in a lot of different community organizations. And that one of the community organizations that she was involved in really pressed us hard for community benefits. And so while we approached the project with very much we want to prioritize bikes and pedestrians first, we didn't necessarily approach it in the most comprehensive manner, as I'll share with you now. So you see on my screen, we put in, this is, I can't even remember what date this plan set was, but we started really thinking about how to connect the North 40 within its boundaries. And so we put a really heavy emphasis on making sure we had sharrows and sort of these effectively like a bike boulevard down the center spine of the project that would continue. And then, although it's not officially a bike boulevard, I don't even know if that existed in 2007. But we also have a multimodal path throughout the center, sort of the heart of the project, both east and west. And then on the perimeter, we have a multi-use path, both on Los Gatos Boulevard as well as on Lark. And so we were really excited about all of these things that we were planning on the interior of our site. And what we heard from folks as we were going out, again, being very excited at that time, we were looking at, things like working with the local bike shop to get a bike repair station, or at that time there was a vending machine, which those have been discontinued at this point. So there's no vending machine on site, but all the other amenities are there as well as more. But what we were challenged with was, well, that's really great, but what are you connecting to? Like, what do you do? Like, this is wonderful if you live here, but where are you going? And as I showed you before, we were really challenged because excuse me, my toggle is very sensitive. We had these really major barriers to the project. We had we were definitely an island, and we had a lot of things we needed to cross over in order to actually connect us to the trail, which was right over here. And so the neighbors that sort of with Maria and her urging, which you can tell that story once she gets here, but with her urging, were really making us push hard to try to figure out if there was a solution here. And so to try to connect to the Los Gatos Creek Trail and just more bike infrastructure in general. And so this is very, I'll pan in just a moment, but this is sort of the boundary of a portion of the North 40 that we're developing. And you can see what this means, right? This is State Route 17 right here, and how wide that is. And there's off ramps. And then on the other side, there's 85 and off ramps. And so we have several off ramps that we had to contend with. And then we had some very large intersections on either side of the project. And so what the neighbors initially asked for was a bridge from the North 40 development, some sort of bike or pedestrian connection to the other side. And the challenge with that is cost. I'll say this would be a very, very, very large span. We'd have to have something in the center actually to support the span across 17 and these on and off ramps. But not as so cost, but honestly, just getting that type of agency approval for anything like this just became very overwhelming. And to provide context, the North 40 in total, the phase one was 320 residences and about 70,000 square feet of commercial. So but I don't think neighbors really understand what that means. To them, that means each one of these homes is gonna sell for $1 million. So if there's 320 homes, that means $320 million. So you have this big bucket of money that you can do things with. But that's not really how it works, right? There's lots of costs that go into things, and this sort of project, that type of infrastructure project, would be in the tens of millions of dollars. And so it would have just destroyed the project, right? We couldn't move forward. So then we started looking at other things like could you actually build onto, there's a bridge right here. Could you build onto that bridge so that there could be like an expansion path, so that somehow you expand it, it cantilevers over. We were trying to find any kind of solution, and we just were not able to figure that out from an engineering perspective. And so we went to a neighborhood meeting right actually over here, if you can see sort of my, actually over here, if you can see my cursor, this is a neighborhood called Charter Oaks, and we met with them frequently. And they finally said, we just don't want to even hear from you guys again until you come up with a solution for how you're going to connect this project to the trail. And this is something we wanted to do. It's just that we were faced with if we do this, we don't have a project anymore. And so that very next day, we took our entire engineering team out and we walked the site, or the surrounding areas, I should say, to try to figure out what all the constraints were and what, if anything, we could do. And this is not intended to be this is a very much an engineering document, but I wanted you to sort of see the scale that we're talking about. And where a major constraint was, we had plenty of room in the right of way to put in bike lanes. What we didn't have was room over Highway 17. So this overpass was very narrow, and it created problems as far as being able to install even a 5-foot wide bike lane. There just wasn't the lane widths per Caltrain or Caltrans standards. So we then back to something a little bit more attractive to look at. We then worked to get a meeting with Caltrans through the Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition, actually, who helped set up that meeting. At that time, Caltrans didn't even have a bike and ped section in their organization, right? They didn't even have that. So they're solely focused really on vehicular priorities. And so this portion of Caltrans had just really recently been formed, and we met with them, who then also met with the engineering folks, and you had a lot of people kind of butting heads at these meetings trying to figure out if any of these standards could be loosened for the lane widths. This is a 25-mile-an-hour zone. Do you really need to have a 14-foot wide lane here? Mind you, again, it's an on-ramp, so you do need some turning radius and so forth. So we're actually, I believe, the first group that was able to loosen those Caltrans requirements. So suddenly, or not suddenly, over months and months and months and months, we were able to establish, interior lanes and exterior lanes, and we were able to shave about 1 foot to 2 feet off each one of these lanes, which enabled us then to actually design for a bike lane across Highway 17 on the overpass. So that was really, this was something Los Gatos had actually been trying to do. The town themselves had been trying to work with Caltrans to get this to happen, and they were unable to make that happen. But actually, with the Bicycle Coalition and that activism, we were able to kind of move a mountain that the engineering department in Los Gatos hadn't yet been able to move. And it could have just been the right people came on board, there became better dialogue, there became more of an interest. Los Gatos is a super friendly bike, community. And so there were lots of voices that wanted to see this happen. And so with that, we were able actually to install bike lanes all down Lark to connect right to the Los Gatos Creek Trail right here. And with that, it kind of opened up this opportunity for our residents to get right to downtown with safety in mind, right, and comfortably, but also so that they didn't feel so reliant upon getting into a vehicle just to get downtown to the farmers market. And so that was really what we were looking for, is to sell a lifestyle to residents of the North 40, future residents of the North 40, that was really committed to getting out of their cars. And it doesn't seem earth-shattering now that we're in 2023, but when we were talking about this in 2011, this was all pretty exciting. And it's still really exciting, actually. So ultimately, we also, some of the other amenities that we put on site were things, really simple things, but that you just don't think about when you're constructing a townhome, for example, to make sure that the spacing between the 2x4s and the garages were space so that you could actually put a bike rack up and you weren't challenged with getting bike racks up. So we would, as a part of your package, when you came into your home, you had a bike rack already in your garage. And then in your welcome package, you would get a gift certificate to a local bike shop for, maybe a helmet or, bike rental or whatever it was. It wasn't going to buy you a bike, but it was going to get you a lot further than just if you had nothing. And so sort of just celebrating the lifestyle instead of just doing it as like a tack on at the end, because that's what people wanted. That's what we were really going for here. And now as the project has evolved, because again, that was, 2011, this was approved, the project was approved sort of approved in 2016. It actually went to a lawsuit in order to get the project approved. But even then, 2016, now it's 2023. As we move forward with this commercial portion of the development, now we're doing things like next to bike racks, putting in electricity so you can plug your e-bike in, right? So we have outlets there. That wasn't even contemplated in our original design because e-bikes hadn't really taken off at that time. So that's a little bit of the where we were, where we are today. Now Summerhill has built out, I think they have 253 townhomes, and they've built out, I would say, about 2/3 to 3/4 of them with about the same, about 2/3 of them at this point sold and occupied. We've heard lots of great things as far as, the lifestyle here and the choices that people make as a part of living here. And so it's exciting to actually see it come to fruition. Once phase 2, which is over in this area, actually comes online, they'll be able to tie right into the bike infrastructure so that it's a seamless connection. The idea is never to make this feel like two distinct projects. It was always to have some cohesion between the two. So the multi-use path will be able to continue. You can see this multi-use path kind of snuck through the middle of the project, ended up weaving down right here to cross over into this next phase, just due to grades and so forth. And we really created, and then again, tucks down through this direction. And so the idea was that if you were, a serious sort of spandex cyclist, right, you could stay right on Los Gatos Boulevard or Lark. But if you wanted to, if you were a kid and you wanted to come in and go to the park, that you could have a way of getting off of the path and getting into the development. So that's kind of my very long elevator pitch on what it was that we did, where we were, where we are today. I don't know if anybody has, Sanjay, do you have any questions for me specifically before Maria joins?
Sure, I do have some questions, and anyone else from participants, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and I can read them out for Wendy. So I think, Wendy, you touched a little bit on this, but can you elaborate a little bit more on what role does an advocate play? Well, I think we can keep this for Maria because she played the role of the advocate. So in case she's able to.
I can tell you from the developer's perspective, at least this developer's perspective, because not everyone's going to be the same. Sure. But the first time I ever met Maria, I kind of walked away and I tease her now about this, but I walked away from that conversation thinking, I don't know if we're ever going to be able to find something to have a common ground on. She seems like a really nice woman. Like, we had a great coffee, but I don't know because it's sometimes hard to find that common ground. I think that she picked what her passion was and what her focus was. And lots of people do this, right, for what their focus is. And when you can focus on one thing rather than just trying to stop a project or stop a development, it can help shape a development rather than just it constantly sort of butting heads. So I value that input, because if we can find common ground and we can find something we can work on together that will improve the community and improve the neighborhood, whether it's the new neighborhood or the already existing neighborhood, the community that we're building in, that's a win for me. But if somebody is just there to try to fight a project and doesn't have some way of communicating so we can have find common ground. It just gets really difficult. So I will say that for advocates, in this instance, Maria and the group she was with was very, interested in finding that connection across the freeway. And so that became everything that not everything, but much of what they focused on with these community meetings. They just they were relentless. And it was really important to us to say, we've explored every option because it's meaningful to us as well. But so that I think that's something that's always really helpful, because if you have most of the folks that I work with in the development community want to hear these things because it will help make the community better. The neighbors know the area very well, and it can help improve the community. So I that would be my my thought. And I saw something in the chat too, that the Google doesn't show bike paths on Lark or bike lanes on Lark. It's probably because Google may be a little bit outdated. That restriping was literally still going in, couldn't go in until all the intersection improvements were done. So I will also say one place of conflict we had in this project was what we normally hear from neighbors and from the community. There's one of the biggest things we always hear about is traffic. It's all about traffic, and it's all about not making any more delay or any additional cars on the road, which we were obviously focused on to try to get people out of their cars on this project. But the intersection, there's a lot of intersection improvement that the town had planned for this area that they asked Summerhill and the developers here to pick up the cost on. And so to me, that always runs in conflict, because as soon as you start widening lanes and adding more lanes and making these intersection improvements, and there's 3 left turn lanes out there now instead of 2, it just creates the ability for people to get into their cars even more. And at the same time, I'm trying to create a bike friendly situation where people are comfortable riding on Lark or Los Gatos Boulevard. And those really can, they completely conflict with one another. So before we got in, but we were able to make it work, and we brought in Alta, we brought in the Bike Coalition, we brought in every expert we knew to try to weigh in on the bicycle safety on and around these areas. And so before those bike lanes were all striped out, all those intersection improvements had to happen. And I think those just wrapped up fairly recently. So it just may be that if you go out and drive it today, or you bike it ideally today, you'll see that most of these improvements are in place already.
So we spoke about advocates and what role they should play. What role did the council play during this project? And how on board were they with what the community wants with respect to improvements related to bike ped stuff, and how was it dealing with them throughout the process?
The town council, Los Gatos the town, it changed a lot. So I believe before we got, and we didn't really get an approval. We got a forced approval because of a lawsuit that we were in conformance with all objective criteria within the specific plan and all of their documents, but we were not approved because of the contentious nature of 320 housing units in Los Gatos. So we conformed to all of the standards and were above and beyond what we needed to do for the project, but we were still denied. And so unfortunately, the way this got approved was by going to court. So I think by the time we got approved was 2016, 2017. And since that was about 12 years, I think we'd gone through 3 councils at that point. So the council makeup changed a lot. The council priorities changed a lot over that time. And I will say that it's really hard, even if you are a supporter of a project like this in a jurisdiction, to feel comfortable vocalizing that sometimes, because the pressure on the council members was tremendous. There was a lot of backlash because Los Gatos had never seen a project this large. And just honestly, this may seem very small for many people that are accustomed to seeing some of these larger projects, maybe they're on the peninsula or in San Jose and so forth. But for Los Gatos, this was the biggest project they had seen ever. So well, certainly since it got built out, in the 50s, 60s, 70s. So this was very contentious. So I wouldn't really say we had a lot of, ultimately we had 3 folks on council that supported the project. And I think 2 were fairly vocal throughout the entire time. And then 1 was supportive of some elements and some of not. And then we had 2 council members that were not supportive of the project. So that's sort of where it landed. I'm not sure. Some of the council members were very interested in the bike and pedestrian improvements, but I think this goes back to my first point of sometimes we can't see through all of the noise. And until we can start talking about, we wanted to hear input from park design to architecture to the bike and pedestrian improvements. And it was really hard to get to that when people focused on traffic and sort of, just didn't know. So we tried to find the people that we could get feedback from and collect information from to make this a better project.
Thanks, Wendy. And we have more questions around the Lark Avenue stretch, especially for the stretch where it was class 2. Was that a width issue or something else? Why was it a class 2 and not a continuation of the raised sidewalk?
So there actually were 2 improvements. Maybe we can go back along Lark. We had, I'm not sure if this will show it. I asked my civil for some documents. You can't actually, I don't actually think you can see it all along here. We had first of all, we had a lot of conflicts along the frontage. We had ingress and egress, both for the property, but then as I mentioned also for the, for these on-ramps. So we had 2 different types of frontage improvements for bikes and pedestrians. One is this sort of orange area that you see here. This wasn't the final design, but this was an exhibit we used frequently.
Wendy, we can't see your screen, Wendy.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Nice. Late
in the day, guys. So this orange right here, which continues on, by the way, even though we didn't, these properties we didn't develop, we continued this on. So it was, there was no break in it. So this is a 10-foot multi-use path. It's effectively a 10-foot wide paved pathway with landscaping on either side. So this is along Los Gatos Boulevard and Lark. Now along Los Gatos Boulevard, there is not the width to actually add bike lanes. That is a constrained area until there is development on the other side, because there's some issues with it being choppy because of county land and so forth. So the town's long-term plan is to put bike lanes on both sides of Los Gatos Boulevard. But in the interim, we have a 10-foot wide multi-use path. Then on Lark, we actually have bike lanes on the south side. And then on this side, we also have bike lanes. This is not the final plan, you guys, so bear with me, but there was some bike boxes and so forth in here. And then you would turn in and there are bike lanes along the frontage, and then you cross over, and then there's a bike lane that continues on over on the overpass. And these mostly, striped green and so forth. And then again, it continues across this intersection here, and it continues down. This is where we had plenty of room, and we actually we have striped lanes here that separate the bike lane from the travel. I believe they're only striped. I don't think there's bollards there, but I think it's several feet of striping in between. And then it continues on till it connects to the Los Gatos Creek Trail. And then it actually does continue on to Charter Oaks. So and then through the project, those were 10-foot wide multi-use paths as well. Those were not the 5-foot sidewalks. We had 5 or 6 foot sidewalks other places within the project, but we had a widened trail. It actually, I think, got to be almost 12 feet in some places, because we ended up putting some, whether it was DG or other things on the side to kind of provide a little bit of buffer between the landscaping, so it didn't overhang the multi-use path and didn't interfere sort of the bikes and any kind of cross traffic. We actually had a little bit of a debate, a lot of debate with the town engineers on this design, on lots of designs, because the engineers wanted pretty much everything to be paved and everything to be very straight. And so we really wanted for the multi-use path within our project to meander more, to slow people down, to slow the bikes down in particular. We didn't want them zooming through the project. That they could do on the perimeter of the site, but on the interior of the site, we wanted things to be a little bit more slow moving. So we worked with the town, and again, we had Alta who helped us with the design so that we could make sure it was, it wasn't intimidating then for people to use, because we didn't want it to just be another like high-speed bike lane through the site. And then on the main streets there were sharrows on those streets. There weren't separate bike lanes on the main spines of streets through the project.
Since we were talking about multi-use paths and paths shared between bicyclists and pedestrians, there was a question in the chat from a resident of Palo Alto. And Kenjoy is asking that there have been some conflicts around multi-use paths, especially where pedestrians think cyclists are a hazard. So has that been the case for North 40 paths? Did you have similar concerns in the process of the development?
I think some things are yet to be known, right? Because this is still under construction. So we have, again, there's probably 150 or 170 homes that have been sold and are occupied there now. Phase 2 is still in process. So once it all joins together, we're going to have a more cohesive plan. So I think some of this is a work in progress. So I don't know ultimately how it's all going to shake out, right? I can hope for the best, but I don't know in practice 10 years from now, am I going to go there and say, boy, this really worked? I hope I do, but I might say, I wish I had done this and this and this differently. And I also hope I see a little of that so I know what to do differently down the line. But I will say on this project, we have a lot of sidewalk only spaces, some which run parallel, essentially, just one row down or one street down to that multi-use path. So, but because it's nestled in between the townhomes, there's landscaping on either side. We tried to make sure that there were it was meandering a bit. I'm hopeful that with that, it doesn't just become, again, a thoroughfare, and that pedestrians can also feel comfortable on that path. But if they don't, then there's lots of alternatives for them. So it is an opportunity where it was a big enough site that we had lots of alternatives.
And this is a good segue into the next question, which is, you said this project started in 2011, and that is when you had the first conceptual plans. 12 years later, is there anything at the project that you wish you could have done better, or something that you could have thought about at that time?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think this is a really tough site. And it's hard for me as someone, some of you all know that I worked on this and work on the Sequoia Station project in Redwood City, and that is directly adjacent to transit. It's just a very rich transit site, and that's really exciting, and it presents different opportunities. I wish that this site had that. We have one bus route that we actually did improved bus stops on either side. We created like a new bus pad and everything for folks to hopefully encourage, and we use transit passes as a part of our TDM plan. I wish this site had more access to those sorts of things, but that's nothing I can change, right? That was just, it was always a struggle for Don and I working on this project, because we advocate for transit use and we are transit users, and yet this site was very suburban and very much not attached to anything from a transit, from a mass transit perspective, I'll say. So I think that we went in there with a lot of aspirations, such as we really wanted VTA to increase their service along there, and that just couldn't happen. There were budget constraints and so forth, and so we're still lucky to have bus service along Los Gatos Boulevard, but it never was improved to the amount it could be. And maybe when phase 2 happens, there'll be enough users out here that maybe it will be. So I think that that was something that I had to adjust my expectations to. And I really wish that at the end of the day, this took so long to get done. And I think there was just a general fatigue at the end of this process that I wish that we had had more time to work through some of the challenges we had, the push-pull we had with engineering, because I felt like we ultimately had more pavement than what I wanted in this project, be it for vehicles or even for the multi-use path. It just kept widening and widening and widening. I wish that we had been able to get more landscaping in there, but we still have 30% of the site is landscaping of the overall project, actually more than that. But I wish that we had been able to, it could have felt richer in landscaping right from the onset. So I'll say that because that helps people feel like there's a sense of place. Landscaping is so important.
Yeah.
We were like negotiating between utility boxes and trees, and that's what I wish we had had more time to negotiate, but we just were running out of time.
Yeah. Especially now, there is so much discussion around green streets, and that is something that can go into place with big developments like this. And it's so hard to go do anything of that sort with smaller improvements. But on that note, what learnings did you take from this project that you're applying to some current projects that you're working on? Like you mentioned the Sequoia Station project, and you're also working on the Kylie project in Santa Clara. So what were some learnings that you took from North 40 that have been useful on the other projects that you're working on?
Yeah, well, I mean, some things, like I said, that exist today didn't even exist as, I'm sure they existed, but as part of the dialogue that you're having with agencies and their standards didn't even exist then. So, you know, the multi-use path question is a really important one. You know, multi-use paths can be very successful or very unsuccessful depending on the setting. And so I think that we've been able to, Sharrows, another great example, depending on the street, are Sharrows the right thing to be utilizing? Is that the right tool? Or should we be separating out the bike lanes more? Or should we be doing some other, again, bike boulevards are a newer concept. I don't even know if Los Gatos has a bike boulevard concept yet. So they didn't even have back then, they didn't even have a bike and pedestrian master plan. So this project was actually a catalyst for those sorts of things. So I think that what you learn is, or lessons learned are kind of, you're learning all along is, okay, maybe this isn't, maybe we should have used this in the toolbox instead of this in the toolbox, because this project is different. And so it doesn't, a multi-use path isn't going to work in this instance. Or, you know, maybe Sharrows don't work on this street because it's too busy. Or in the case of Sequoia Station, that is not a bike boulevard. It was too much volume on that street to truly be a bike boulevard. So what can we do instead? Even though the city had identified it as a bike boulevard. So we're constantly kind of tweaking and learning and trying to work with groups like this group to get information that we can apply to either the projects that we're working on today and possibly the projects in the future.
Sanjay, you're muted.
Oops, sorry. Thanks. I was just saying that throughout your presentation, you mentioned a few times that you had to delay the project because of various reasons, and maybe sometimes you did not have community support or council support or Caltrans issues. Can you talk about the trade-offs between prolonging the project and moving forward with something that is not perfect? What would you prefer in hindsight?
Yeah, so I think it's really tough because the longer a project goes, the more information you can glean. But it's really hard to keep evolving a project based off of new voices that come in. Not that they're not valued, but the longer a project takes, the more money it's going to cost. And there are certain things that I would always prefer to spend my money on these sorts of improvements that we're talking about today than carrying costs for closing on land. That's money that benefits nobody but the bank, right? So but those are very real constraints. So the longer a project goes, the more costly it gets, the more risk there is. We have a lawsuit in this project. I would have rather put that $2 million that it costs for that lawsuit into local schools or into more bike infrastructure somewhere offsite. I would have rather done all those things with that money, never mind developer profit, right? I would have rather done any number of things rather than do the things that we're talking, than defending a lawsuit or having to have carrying costs to go to the bank. So I think that there are always, we have to be realistic, right? We can't ask for a project that has 12 townhomes to put the cost of something that's multi millions of dollars, because that will break the project. So at some point we kind of have to go, okay, we actually want this to happen because it's going to afford us this, this, and this. And there's going to be a trade-off because we're going to have 12 townhomes here instead of 2 single-family detached homes. I don't know what your land use policies are on those on the call, if that's supported or not supported. But if something may be inevitable, then sometimes it's easier to work kind of with the current and figure out then where to put that funding that can be useful instead of it just going again towards lawsuits or other things. So I'm just, unfortunately, I've been in these trenches for a long time, and it bums me out. It bums me out to know that how much money it cost me, or Summerhill, I should say, to carry this land while we were fighting a lawsuit.
Yeah, it's a tough trade-off. Like one is time and one is money, and things may get better often, especially if you have time to gather input and engage people so that you incorporate all the feedback versus regret a few years later.
Yeah, I wonder sometimes when people walk this site, if they go, gosh, why is that like this? A lot of times developers will be the ones like, oh, that developer didn't know what they're doing. But sometimes it's because, again, the passage of time, projects have evolved, there's a new standard that may be better. But it didn't get caught then. Or it could be that there are things that happen between different agencies or groups that people don't know about, that somebody didn't win in that. And so maybe it could have been better, but it didn't work out that way behind closed doors. When you're looking at a plan set and you actually try to implement it, could be different. So I think there's really good things as far as input and so forth for a period of time. But I think for a project like this, it's too long. That's a very long period of time. And it'll crater projects, candidly.
Another question is, we talked a little bit about what role do advocates play, but like from a developer's perspective, what is the best method for advocates to reach out to developers when they have an issue or an idea or a suggestion that they want to be included in the project or plan?
Yeah, I mean, most developers or developments have, a point of contact, and I know I'm always happy to meet over coffee, or nowadays it's by Zoom, but I prefer it over coffee or in any setting that someone's comfortable sharing information, even if it's just an email. All these things can make, again, it's just different when you meet with somebody and it's immediately hostile versus if you're meeting with somebody to gain if you can both approach it as gaining information from the other person. So I would say if you go in with a focus of several things, it doesn't have to be one thing, and then you can have a conversation about why that may or may not work, but what maybe they can look into. I think a lot of developers are very willing to have these conversations, but we're very accustomed to kind of hostility instead. And so I don't find that in all places I work in, but usually if there's town or something like that in front of it, it becomes a little bit of a different dialogue from the beginning. So the more open you can be and transparent with sort of what your priorities are, the more that somebody can help, the developer can be honest with you as whether or not it can be integrated or not.
There are a few questions on the Franklin Street, which is a part of the Sequoia Station project. I know it's not a part of the North 41, but you're still leading that effort. Do you want to throw some light on how that shifted from being a bike boulevard to a class 2 bike lane? Or
Yeah, so that I'm not, that one is tough, because I think that the city put in their plans the goal for that portion of Franklin Street to be a bike boulevard. And I know that we agree with SBBC as well as many members of the community that there's, as well as probably a lot of experts, that there's just too much volume on that street for that to be successful. And so I know that as a part of the evolution of the design, that other alternatives are being looked at. So I don't think anything's finalized with that or not, but the voices have been heard. And we actually agreed with that. Our challenge was there was a policy document that stated it should be a bike boulevard. So then it becomes this challenge of, okay, well, what do you do? If you have a, because it's hard for us to amend policy documents like that, right? Suddenly we're in the business of telling the town or city what to do with their policy. And that's just an uncomfortable place for a developer to be. But I think that the voices from the community have been heard for Franklin Street. So I'll just leave it there because I think there's a lot there that still hasn't gone to the next stage as far as getting back to planning commission or to council or anything like that. But I think that there's some design shifts that hopefully will be very successful as the project moves forward. Sanjay, you are on mute.
Mute.
Sorry. I was just saying that there's a question in the chat which is asking about standards. So it's a good segue into wrapping or closing this out, because at our next forum, we're going to have Brandon White from the city of Mountain View, who's going to talk about different bikeway standards across different from different agencies like NACTO, ASHTO, ITE. And those guidelines are way more progressive than some of the older guidelines. So how can we push our cities to make sure that they're at least following those and adhering to those wherever possible? And while Maria could not join us because she was stuck up in a meeting with the town manager, and I'm sure it must be something crucial, I just wanted to say one thing that she would have said if she was here. Her experience when she started advocating, or rather kind of criticizing this project, she came into this project saying that this development should not happen, but it changed over time. And what she came out learning as a resident and later as a council member was that as advocates, our sole purpose should not be to go out and oppose projects or just criticize them to make sure they don't happen, because they are going to happen anyways. So let's look at it more constructively and provide more constructive feedback and look at how we can make this work together. How can we partner? How can we become allies? And may it be developers, may it be city staff, may it be elected officials. How can we partner with these decision makers to build something more constructive versus just constantly trying to oppose something? So I'm trying to put words in Maria's mouth, but I think she would have said that if she was here. Any closing thoughts, Wendy?
Yeah, I'll just say that I'm really glad that we were able to, again, we kind of moved some mountains with Caltrans and getting those lanes narrowed along that overpass. Maybe someday that overpass will be reconstructed and widened and so forth, so that we can get all of the facilities on there that should be on there for bicycles and pedestrians. It's a narrow sidewalk. It's still a narrow bike lane. But from our perspective, it was better than a gap in the system, and it wasn't going to be for, your toddler would probably be up on the sidewalk, not in the bike lane adjacent to traffic. So I agree with a lot of the comments that I'm seeing in here. But I'm also glad, like, it takes a lot of pushing for some of these agencies to make adjustments. And so the more that we can all push together, I think it's the better for everyone. I don't think that that most developers are interested in just paving wider lanes or just not having access to their sites. I think that generally all of us can have a unified voice in this, and we really appreciated the help from the advocates in the Bicycle Coalition to be able to be successful with that. It may be measured success in today's standards and so forth, but it was again in 2007, 2011, this was a pretty stunning breakthrough. So we have to kind of recognize those wins when we have them and use them as like a platform for future successes. And thank you so much for having me today, guys. I know no one wants to hear a developer talk for an hour, including myself. So thanks for your patience and listening to me. And I'm always available if folks wanted to reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat in case you don't have it.
Thank you so much, Wendy, for joining. And on that note, we're ready to open our breakout rooms. I just wanted to make a quick announcement that in the San Jose local team breakout room today, we're going to have Erica Pinto from SPUR talk about MTC's new transit-oriented communities policy. The transit-oriented communities policy is going to talk about 4 major recommendations or policies around parking, housing, station access, and one more thing, which I'm forgetting right now, and how it will affect changes around major Caltrain stations, all light rail stations, major interchanges. So if you're interested in learning more about that, join the San Jose local team for the breakout.